what tends to happen in terms of the evolution of human experience and human consciousness is we move from a space of association with a particular identity framework, from seeing and experiencing the world, to dissociation from that, like a pendulum swinging out.
Mm-hmm.
But it's not just, to your point about waking up, it's also waking down. So there's also then this descending current that follows that seeks to include that which was previously misperceived as proportionately opposed to its freedom, right?
Mm.
So that which we are sort of transcending comes to be, from, again, just an experience of perspective, reintegrated. So there's a feeling of almost like I have to go outside of everything I thought was true and real,
Mm-hmm.
and then there's an experience of, I'm raising my vibration, I'm transcending my conscious, all like sort of that whole aspect that we'll see. And there is a large contingency, if you will, of that on our planet right now. However, I'll take that over the complete
Mm-hmm.
enmeshment with the identification with the material consciousness. And it's the problem, the pathology arises when we don't proceed into the integrative aspect, when we
Yes.
stay transcended without actually integrating. But we don't get to the integration, without moving through that transcendent phase.
Welcome to Ignite the Spark Within, a podcast designed to do just that. Ignite your spark within you. I'm your host, Sarah Malone, owner of Spark Fitness and Lifestyle Coaching, and voted Yahoo Finance's top 10 female coaches to follow in 2021. I believe everyone has a fire inside them, a powerful purpose, a story waiting to be told, and everyone can uncover and unleash this power. Every day you have the choice to either let your experiences shape you or take control and use your experiences to shape the world around you. You were made to experience happiness, freedom, joy, purpose, love, passion, and abundance. Disrupt the status quo, think for yourself, and join forces with those around you doing the same. Join me for thought-provoking conversations along with the strategies needed in order to help you ignite your spark within. I just want to get started right away, more of a candid conversation with you. The healing space can be somewhat, it's vulnerable. And what I find being in the healing space is that we all have such a deep, deep story into what got us into that calling in the first place. So I'm really just curious, and I want my listeners to hear this story as well. What got you into the healing space in general, and what ignited that calling for you? How did you know that this was your calling to do?
Yeah, thank you for the question. And again, thank you for inviting me to be here in this conversation, especially at this time when there's so much hurting happening in our world, and healing is what is being called for. And really to ask ourselves this question of what brings us here? How can I be of service? How can I support the healing that our world is in need of? And I think that does directly begin with the healing work that we're doing inside of our own being, because we can only be present with another human to the degree that we've been present with ourselves. This is one of the virtues or qualities of the healing work that I believe. I don't mean to say that we can't hold space for people's healing journey if we haven't been in the exact situation, but it is a reflection of the depth of our own inner work to how much we can genuinely and sincerely meet another human being. And so, to answer your question with more specificity, it's ironic. My answer is going to be that I don't really know. Is it, for as long as I can remember, the internal path of curiosity and self-investigation has been somewhat present in my psyche, even as a little kid, Sarah, 3, 4 years old. My oldest memories that I have had experiences around questioning what was occurring in front of me in terms of the interpersonal dynamics. And I think as a teenager, I'm 48 now, but as a teenager, I was reading books about psychology and philosophy and spirituality and reincarnation and all of these things. They just spoke to me as if they were the voice I've always had. What I soon came to realize is that the difficulties we traverse in our lives are actually doorways into deeper exploration of who we truly are. And so the various wounds are like they're windows into ourselves. And so this spoke to me. I don't think I came across practices. By that, I mean things like yoga, meditation, breath work, mantra practices that speak to me into my mid-20s. So I've been teaching now for about 21, 22 years. And I'd say that decade or so from my mid-teens to my mid-20s was a lot of trial by fire, so to speak, and as has been the story for many of us. But ultimately, we, I think, in my experience, went through enough heartbreak that it almost catalyzed the curiosity to, and then it just started to feel like I was speaking an ancient but familiar language, and I haven't stopped studying it, speaking it, being passionate about it, feeling called to this conversation. I don't even want to say every day of my life. I think sometimes we throw that around it's a daily practice. I think that's too macro. I really do think it's a moment by moment presence that we live in, because when we really get into the timeless nature of self and the intersection of the psychology of healing and the philosophy of self, where philosophy and psychology intersect, is where we have an opportunity to access a sense of orientation to the path. And by that I mean, who is this one that claims to be hurt? Who is this one that thinks they need to heal? Is that what is implied within the term healing? It sounds like it's some sort of finality that we're trying to achieve. Are we perpetuating the cycle unconsciously by relating to it that way? So in my own experience, it's been really seeing my own inner landscape as the lab, so to speak.
Oh my gosh, there is so much you just said that my mind is just bookmarking, and I really pray that my listeners can slow that part down and really take in everything you just said, Scott, because there's so many nuggets. And the one that jumps out to me immediately, because I resonate with you so much, I believe that curiosity is the beginning to the journey. And by the journey, I mean more of an awareness of what we are, who we are, and how we are living this human experience. And I think sometimes when we start to say healing, I'm healing, that becomes a new identity for us, the identity of healing. And it's almost like you said, this almost outcome that we're searching for in order to feel like we're healing and we're doing something. It's the perpetual state of progress or feeling like we're accomplishing something. And so what is healing to you? Because I know what it is to me. And for me, I just feel like that's life.
I love that. Yeah, it's a great definition. I think there is something organic within consciousness itself. And I say that not just human consciousness, but consciousness itself, to have a certain telos towards integration. In other words, there's almost like an effect present within the cause. But by that, I mean that consciousness arises through a particular biological vehicle, but it's as if that biological vehicle was coded to self-express that which is innate within it. When we come into relationship, and then ultimately identity with that which is fundamental or inherent, there's an experience of integrating that part that felt exiled off from the tapestry of the whole. And I think every time in each moment there is that integration that occurs. We label that with the word healing. So I would say for me, healing is synonymous with integration of the parts that haven't been fully woven into our wholeness, but that's only occurring at the level of perception. In other words, we're not actually taking anything that is separate and making it whole. We're not actually creating union or creating integration. We're revealing that which already is and inviting the awareness that we've adopted to expand, to include a bigger picture of not only what it's always been, but to use a double negative, what it could never not be, because that which is essential isn't subject to threat. And so oftentimes it's finding that part of ourselves, that particular, we can call it an egoic construct. I don't hold ego in a negative light. I think it's an aspect of, or fulcrum of consciousness, that when we come into connection with the resonance of truth, not conceptually, but in an embodied way,
Yes,
there's a sense of home that we feel that sort of like washes over our being. It's almost, for me anyway, each time it feels like an exhale or a quality of relief, not in a sense of it. It's paradoxical because we don't have to become what we already are, and on one level, but we're not superimposing a finality onto it as if we are getting trapped in this idea that we assert the reality of an illusion in the name of overcoming it. And that's where I think we get stuck into the perpetual progress path that you were talking about, because it's like, okay, I've created this idea of self that is fundamentally unfree, and then I've tasked this idea with overcoming itself, which only perpetuates itself. So until we get off of that treadmill, that hamster wheel, we'll continue to put brackets around various identities within ourselves rather than coming into the felt experience of the integrated self that we are, which by extension doesn't mean just me, but it means that you're an extension of me. And everywhere I perceive separation as fundamental, I'm falling asleep to the deeper reality of what is true.
Oh my gosh, so beautifully articulated. And I was making some notes while you said that. And I want to summarize what you've just said as far as the path of healing in to my listeners in kind of like very layman's terms. And what he's really describing here is the integration of your parts, not in actually doing or fixing any brokenness to you, because we know that once we wake up to who we really are, we realize that we're not broken, and it's just a path to proper perspective of who we really are, which is all of these different parts that have manifested themselves, which I call these ego parts. And when you really learn psychology and the nature of the subconscious mind, is what they are. They're parts of the ego that manifest themselves to create almost a separateness or a protection. And we don't have to fix anything. We just have to bring them back into oneness with who we really are in that self-like quality, that self-like energy that begins with curiosity, instead of trying to exile these parts as to something separate or bad or unneeded or needing to be fixed or removed or controlled in any way. And then what you said about you being an extension of me and vice versa, it's that concept of the mirror, where we are all one, and that oneness. Now we can take this on a very conscious level and we can learn all of these things. But what Scott was really saying is that when you really know these things, and when you're doing, quote unquote, what people refer to as the work, when you're actually doing it, you come into this resonant place within that can only be embodied. Like you said, when you get to that space, when you feel that embodiment, it's like an exhale, a deep exhale. Because you realize that there's nothing that you need to do in order to be. And that's the funny part is I hear so many people in the healing journey that are like, I just need to be more. I need to be more. And the fact that we think we need to be more is another part of the ego that's just like you said, containing or restraining us.
So it's so fascinating, right? This like do to be equation, if we were to just reverse that, how much more sovereignty we would experience in our lives. I would, first off, that was beautiful. Thank you for that re-summarization in your own words. That was its own reflecting, and I'm grateful to be able to have taken that in. So thank you for that explanation. I would add a couple of things, or maybe in terms of how I hold it, maybe a couple of little refinements in it, which one is more like an add, not a refinement, but it's just simply that we don't have to do that. We get to do that. And I know that's like a little cliched a little bit, but it is indicative of the way we orient to the experience. Because sometimes when we orient to it with that sort of task energy of have to, there is an element of us that's still sort of subtly saying, I just got to do this. And then, it's almost like implied. But when I really receive it as a gift, a blessing to return back to remembrance fundamentally, yes. It just, the feeling of the entire experience shifts. And then the other piece that's been percolating more lately for me is that part that falls asleep to who we are, the part that otherizes, whatever, if we might call it the ego, the part that outsources security, validation, et cetera, right down the line. That too is soul. Ego, to me, is soul.
Go into that a little bit for me.
Yeah, the idea that we define ego by that which makes us or an aspect of us separate or other. And then the very next thing that we do is make that part of us separate or other is a trap. And so even the part of us that is doing that, while yes, it's a forgetting, at a fundamental level, it is still us. In other words, that tells us we're never not on our path. We're not doing it wrong, right? And even when we're not present to the connection is always present. When I'm able to not vilify any aspect of my nature, instead I turn towards that forgetting and just go, of course look at what the current of life has presented and reflects back to. Of course we forget, and then I turn the forgetting into that muscle memory of remembering. It's like a spiritual weightlifting. Then I'm building that, and I'm grateful for that turning, that capacity to learn how to turn towards myself. Yes. And I thank the forgetting, and I thank I don't even like the term limiting beliefs. I think they're core, they're learned beliefs. I'm thankful for the learned beliefs, because a lot of times they organized reality in a manageable way for my nervous system to navigate the experiences it was having.
Yes.
And now I am inviting them to become unburdened with the responsibility of having to carry life in a particular way that was maybe inherited by what was modeled outside, to let me, as present moment self, take the wheel, and they can come along with me so they don't get exiled back. And that's a big part of the healing journey as well. It's not like I do my inner work, great conversation, peace out. It's would you like to come with me today?
Right.
So that they can
Yes.
learn that part of me can learn to feel safe and
In self.
trust in self. Yes, exactly. So that they can have the experience of exhale, and it's not an override by an awareness that is just picking up on a new capacity of understanding.
Right. Or even a new stimulus. And what's interesting about this whole process, right? So are you familiar with the process IFS?
Yeah, internal family systems work. Sure.
Yes.
Yeah.
And what you're describing is exactly how IFS operates. And it's what I use with my clients in hypnotherapy. But what's interesting about this process is the moment you turn towards the forgetting is you instantly remember. Now you're in remembrance once more in that instant. And how I like to frame it is, I think what I see often, at least in clients and other people, is usually a towards or against, and instead reframing it to be with everything. When we can simply be, like you said, we're never not on our path. I love the double negative, by the way. When we're never not on our path and we're always on time. And so when we can really accept that at a core level, it allows us, well, we give ourselves permission to be with whatever is present at that time. And I like what you said about all of these parts being self, or at least an aspect. And again, all of this is coming down to this path of perspective of how we view it. And when we internally shift from towards or against, we're instantly, again, creating that clash, feeling like we're in ego. And the moment you turn towards or get that curiosity perspective once more, or be with the part, is you allow the opportunity to remember again and then continue on in self. I love all of this.
Beautiful. Yeah, well said.
So how do you work this, as far as how do you work this process with your clients? I know you do a little bit of one-on-one, and you do, you have your yoga studio. So how do you function all of this?
In terms of what a process looks like with somebody in a and then within context of individual and group. That's what
Yes.
we're saying. Sure. So they're two totally different, yet, the intention is the same. The process is often different, and they are powerful in their own rights in different ways. In the individual sense, I think it's very driven by the human being that you're with, and where they are. I try not to get too rigid in the structuring. So I don't have a program that I'm trying to move people through. That was, I guess we can say, it's like in the origin story of my coach work there. It's almost like yoga. It's like yoga is not about getting a person into a posture. It's about getting a posture into a person. And by that, I just mean the yoga asana piece of that. So
all of this reminds me of just where we're at in the collective right now is a very interesting space. I'm sure you can agree with that. With the onset of, the pandemic, what I see intuitively is kind of an age of spiritual awakening, in a sense. And there are many different aspects to what's going on collectively. We don't need to dive into all of that, but one thing has been rising, and that's obviously our spiritual awareness, or our awareness that we are spiritual. And in that process, people are seeking more than ever this ascension, or to raise their consciousness or raise their vibration. What I'm seeing, Scott, is an interesting dynamic of thinking that, and again, this is just another, what I see as forgetting, right? In the path to raising our consciousness, people are attempting to almost disassociate from the human experience and reality in this 3D world that we live, which I believe is a blessing. It's an adventure. It's an opportunity to have this consciousness, this awareness that other spiritual beings don't have. And so how do you see integration of our remembering and our consciousness, because you talked about the ancient wisdom that you just remembered and all of this language. And the same thing happened for me in my process as well, starting at a very young age, with curiosity being the driving force, and also surrender along the way, right? Pieces of surrendering allowed that ancient wisdom to show itself in me once again. And it seems like so obvious. But what I'm asking is, how do you see the integration of this soul consciousness with the human experience, and how can we merge and bridge these two?
I love this question. Thank you. Yeah. Well, for me, it starts with seeing the two as one. Integration it's an interesting journey, because what we're essentially talking about is the evolution of the way a human being experiences their sense of selfhood. So if we can, if we were going to stay within the contextual framework for a brief moment of ascension, the opposite current, the opposite direction of that would be descension. So when we are self-identified or mired in the personality, the intellect, the body, the material world, and that sort of has been the gravity of the human condition for a large period of time, from a relative point of view from within that context, there is an ascending of awareness to move beyond that. That's important. We could say it's crucial to expand the context around that which we believed ourselves to be, sort of a widening of the awareness. What tends to happen in terms of the evolution of human experience and human consciousness is we move from a space of association with a particular identity framework, from seeing and experiencing the world, to dissociation from that, like a pendulum swinging out. But it's not just, to your point about waking up, it's also waking down. So there's also then this descending current that follows that seeks to include that which was previously misperceived as proportionately opposed to its freedom, right? So that which we are sort of transcending comes to be, from, again, just an experience of perspective, reintegrated. So there's a feeling of almost like I have to go outside of everything I thought was true and real. And then there's an experience of I'm raising my vibration, I'm transcending my conscious, all like sort of that whole aspect that we'll see. And there is a large contingency, if you will, of that on our planet right now. However, I'll take that over the complete enmeshment with the identification with the material consciousness. And it's the problem, the pathology arises when we don't proceed into the integrative aspect, when we stay transcended without actually integrating. But we don't get to the integration, without moving through that transcendent phase. So I think, again, it's about, and this is to go back to, you were talking about coaching a little earlier, and why I say I like to meet people where they are. If somebody is in an enmeshed phase, their work might actually look more transcendent for a period of time in order to sort of like shake out of that construct. But for somebody that's been lingering in the ethers, and they're kind of rising above it all, their work might be more descendant. If I come in with a pre-programmed thing, well, I'm not present to what the need is. And so how do we understand where we are in our phases, validate that, and find and apply the proper practice, the proper tool to meet the person in the phase that they happen to be in?
And beautifully said. So I'm so happy that you say that too, because that's how I function my work too. It's more present, and there's no plan. People kind of laugh or they're surprised when I say I don't plan. I don't have a plan. I have tools, and I have an open space where I've prepared myself to be open to what is presenting itself with you, which is the same way I should be meeting myself, if I truly want to have peace, really.
Mhm.
But here's, so this is interesting. I'm making some notes, right? So we go through this process of almost disintegration, right? Where we like disassociation would be a better word for that. We're disassociated. We are in the forgetting phase, and then there's the ascension when we're kind of pursuing that awareness and that remembering of self. And then, like you said, that lingering in the ether. And then it's almost like we have to come back down a little bit to earth. And there are dangers to both of the to all of these phases, really, is what I see. What I really love about the first phase, though, is that there is a sense of humility and curiosity and openness to that discovery process, right? And I think that's such a beautiful and very beneficial and helpful place to be. However, it can lead us into some spaces and entities and openings that are not helpful, even though it may be part of our path. It could be damaging in some other ways, which is fine, because we all experience various forms of adversity, or I would say catalyst to more healing and more awakening. But then what I see as being dangerous right now is this lingering in the ether, like you so eloquently put, in that ascension phase, and thinking that we're much higher than we really are, and then leaving other people with that almost arrogant tone. I don't want to say arrogant person, but the tonality of what we can be leading people into when we're lingering in that ether, that spiritual high horse, if you would, can be dangerous in its own way. Again, nothing's bad unless we define it as bad. But then that come down is almost another interesting, humbling experience, because we're like, wow, I just experienced all of this. I remember now, and I have so much more awareness, but also I'm realizing I'm not as important as I thought I was in some ways. We are very important, then I'm not as important as I thought I was. And then coming back down to earth to realize that I'm truly here to live the full extension of the human experience. And that's really the path. That's it.
Yes.
So
Yeah, it's beautiful.
I like that. And I also like that you can meet people where they are, because I think even if you call yourself, if we identify ourselves as a coach or a healer, we're all coaches, we're all healers, we're all being taught, we're all teachers. And so when we can, really, the shift in consciousness that I see collectively happening right now starts with ourselves. And there's so much fight for our attention in the mind to take us away from that focus on the inner home that we have. And the inner home is going to begin to change the planet if we can only just turn inward once more and find the heaven within. So what's your overall purpose and calling?
Well,
Like
let me back up for one moment and just
yeah, I'm sure you have some add-ons.
yeah, well, again, just so it's refreshing to hear somebody speak about it from this lens. So thank you. And the way that I hold what you were just speaking to is what I would think of as like the virtue of intellectual humility, and how really that is like an infusion of the heart into the spiritual journey, or by whatever words we give it. It's funny, when we reach these ineffable places, words don't really reach them, so we put tags like the healing journey, the work, the coach, the healing, like they're, the words start to lose a little bit of meaning when we move into the felt presence of truth. And and for me, that includes the heart. And so it's interesting and fascinating to me the way when we are having discussions oftentimes around ascension or consciousness, awakening, that there's this almost subtle sense that somehow we're talking only about the mind. And even the term mindfulness has become so pervasive in our culture. And I wrote down recently that my practice is heartfulness in so many ways, and it's not an exclusion of the mind at all. I think that we have different intelligence centers: the gut, the heart, and the head, and we want to awaken each of these capacities within us so that they work together and they're not in an adversarial disposition. But often what is missing, what leads to that arrogance you speak of, is the exclusion of compassion, of love, of warmth, of generosity, of friendliness to one's own patterns even. And so when we learn to be on our own team, to befriend the part of ourself that is generating those patterns, and not leave anyone out, it's where we place those benchmarks of distinction that we move into a more divided or seemingly divided experience. And the mind is, it's one of the virtues of mind, I think, is that it does have the capacity to break things down into these seemingly divisible parts in order to gain a more clear, tiny understanding of what's at play. It's the heart that has the capacity to remove that superimposition and see the integrated whole as it already exists. And when we experience that, there's not just a curiosity, but there's a curiosity and a compassion that together create the recipe for how we can move along that pendulum. Because it's not like we move from an associated state with the material consciousness to this expansive consciousness that disassociates from the material to an integrate. It's not a step one, step two, step three. That helps us to put it in verbiage to bring context to the macro. But within that moment by moment experience, just today, I mean, how many times have you been caught in the web of attachment or fear or anxiety, right? Like, we're doing it all the time, and we're doing it to different degrees within different spaces. So as a father, I might show up one way in the seat of teacher or partner or steward in community, or within any of the sort of buckets of being that I might land in. How do I bring my consciousness there? And so to me, the question of how do we move through that, and what is my purpose with all of this? It's to on an individual level, it's to look at where my practice is having a harder time existing in the consciousness that I know that I am. How can I bring my practice to where it's not, to where it's difficult, to the places where maybe I want to avoid? How can I bring it there? And from there, how can I be of service to the places that I see in the collective, where the collective's having a hard time? And that's rampant right now. And to show up in a way with intellectual humility, with curiosity, with compassion, with validating the experiences that we are each having, to show up in a way that supports that organic, again, integration current that is moving. How can we show up in relationship to one another to support the integration that is, I believe, always making its way, into deeper recognition. It's just been pathologized, it's been usurped, it's been co-opted and hijacked in so many different places, oftentimes in the name of the things that are supposed to provide it. And and so there's so much to me that I see of that happening right now. I I choose to align my life's energy with the imagery of a lighthouse. Like, how can I just be a lighthouse in a world of need of so much healing? How can I be a lighthouse? How can I shine this light into the places of shadow and of forgetting and disowning within me? And then how can I bring that out in like concentric circles to in my me to me, my me to you, and my me to we, which I think are the three lenses of relational awareness. And especially in the places where and with the people whom it is most difficult for me.
I love that. What I would like to point out about the lighthouse metaphor, interesting. I very much resonate with the lighthouse as well. But what I've found interesting, and this has come to me in meditations many of times, is the process. For me, it had to happen from a shift of almost trying to jump into the deep, dark waters to save people. And instead shifting my posture to being the lighthouse, which doesn't move, it just shines.
Beautiful.
It stays centered and rock solid, sitting still, how I say, sit still in the middle. Even when the waters seem to be crashing all around, is just sitting still in the middle and shining bright. So
yeah, and
go ahead.
Well, I was going to say sometimes that is it's worth pausing, because sometimes people misperceive that as being in a seat of inaction.
Right.
I hold it as a seat of being in alignment with the ground that is beneath the fluctuations of change, so that I can be in relationship to those changes in a conscious way.
Beautiful. And I'd like to even add on to that a little bit more is, for me and my own experience too, is it removed the thought that I was the one doing the saving or the changing or the helping or the shifting. It removed that responsibility on my own shoulders to say, I'm going to be who I know myself to be, which is to shine brightly as a light. And then those people who are resonating with that and who need that at that time will be drawn to that or drawn away at their given time, when that time is there. That to me is a more of a surrendering and allowing and a letting go of the process, and not thinking that, again, I'm more important than I really am, other than me just being who I am. Now I want to go back real quick to this heart that you refer to, and I love the concept of the heart and the mind and the gut too, as you stated too. And what I heard you saying was, instead of each of them having, it's like we try to box each thing in its own category, which with its own responsibility. And they have, the mind is going to try to define things so it can make sense of its orientation and where it is, what everything else is, and how are we going to orient ourselves. But bringing those into harmony really is what I see as being what you're referring to anyways, rather than thinking about balance, because balance is, again, it's a this or a that. It's a harmonizing, because in that fluidity, at any given moment, there's going to be either more heart or more head that's needed. And when we can simply, again, back to attachment, when we can simply detach ourselves from trying to be one thing or another, and instead just being what is called of us at any given time, it may require more heart, it may require more head and more rational thinking in order to get something done. And I like this analogy because it reminds me of the masculine and feminine being the heart and the masculine being the mind, and how this yin and yang concept kind of comes into a cohesive harmony in order to produce what we would I think all say we would want more of is peace is really the goal here. And I feel like the more experiences we have to support our own consciousness, the less we need to be doing more heart or more head or defining all of these things. And for me, Scott, I'll just be transparent. What I struggled with and I'm working with at this time is the piece about humility. I've realized that the more you learn, the more experiences you have to support your own consciousness and who you are, it's like the less we feel we need to say. And this supports your argument about words become very difficult when we're talking in this language, and it's more feeling, and feeling can't be really identified or defined or located. It can't be pinpointed. And that makes words very challenging, rather than just almost being with people in this space. It's so interesting to see people that come to me now, and I'm sure you're having similar experiences, when they feel just the presence and the space being opened. It's almost like no words are said, and yet you can see a change in their physiology, a change in their face. Things begin to drop down, and they're able to connect again with their heart.
Mm. Yeah, right on. Thank you for that. Yeah.
I'm realizing now to just leave some open space for you, because you usually have some things to go.
Yeah, no, I'm actually taking in what you just shared and leaving space for that space that is so powerful, so that I don't just fill it with words. And of course we're at a podcast, but it's okay, because I trust too that this frequency shift is felt through these little airwaves, or however they're being transmitted these days. And there is something that it's the presence of being in authenticity that is what is felt. It's almost like a sonar wave gets sent out. It's not what I know, right? It's who I'm being. And it's so much more than where we vest identity at levels of belief or perspectives, all the places we sort of move into the binary of the right and the wrong and the good and the bad. And beneath that, and I said earlier, like, we like working within the constructs of ascension and descension, in a deeper sense, I don't even know that is the right way of thinking about it, like in the sense that only from the mind that has already believed itself to be separate do we think that we have to go beyond. But when we begin with the affirmation of being, there is just sort of I almost see it more as like beneath and behind rather than above and below. And I also don't see it as a before and after. So when I try to I think historically, when we've looked for what is of essence, we've looked interestingly back in time. So he said, let me go back to the Big Bang. Let me go back to God. Like, where did all this come from? But when we do that, we're sort of unconsciously operating within the structure of linear time, while we're seeking something that resides outside of it. So it's an interesting place to look for the thing that's not that thing. And so not to go into too much of the head space, but the experience of amness. There's a term for this in the Buddhist teachings called ta-ta-ta. I love it's one of my favorite words, and it just means like your suchness. And
what's the word again?
Ta-ta-ta.
I love it. I love it.
Yeah. It's like the actual isness of being. And when we're in connection with that, we can express into the manifest, we can be, we're simultaneously both always anyway. It's just
Right.
where we're localizing identity along the spectrum.
Yes.
So it's not so much like I'm jumping to this space and then I'm coming back into the space. It's like it's just a channel, and where you're experiencing identity of consciousness along excuse me, that channel um determines the nature of the experience that we're having.
Yeah.
And the more that we get to experience any phase of it as essential and nothing is left out, then we come into the experience of peace that you speak to, and speak from as well. Yeah.
Mm, I love the time because I you know time is such an interesting topic. It's impossible to describe other than it just being a spectrum, kind of like what you described with the pendulum. And always, it's not like you're like here, here, or here. You're just continually moving along, and nothing is stationary. And we're all moving and changing, expanding, contracting, expanding. I just love this because I think that it's going to provide um, an alternate optional perspective of healing, of life, of ascension, of consciousness, and allows people more information and more. So a lot of my listeners, Scott, like when they listen to this show, they are able to feel the vibration and when it's resonating. And so messages come through along those lines. I really believe that there is something much bigger and deeper happening right now on the planet as far as spiritually and energetically. And it's calling people up. It's calling people up, not in levels, not to say I'm up here and you're down here, but it's calling people up in their vibration and awareness. And what's resonating with them is much different than what has resonated in the past. And so I find that the most hopeful part of all that's happening in the world right now, because we can choose to look at all of this in any which way that we want to. All in all, I think that, well, even when we take this from an individual micro perspective, it's all love. Even the parts of us that forget, it's all done from a place of love. And as hard as it may be to see that in a world that we live in right now, I believe that to be the case externally and on a macro collective level as well. Because I believe in light, I believe in love, I believe in God, and I know that victory has already won. And I know that because of how much it has provoked people in different ways, energetically and consciously, it will lead to a higher conscious planet.
Yeah, I pray for that and hope for that as well. And I know if we were to look at our own individual journeys, you know, in the micro sense, it is oftentimes those cataclysms that are the catalysts, and sometimes it does have to reach that breaking point before consciousness is elevated to that depth of understanding. It's heartbreaking to be, for speaking personally for a moment, in the midst of, while this is being recorded, the human violence and the lack of value placed upon human life. And It's been interesting to be in these teachings and these awarenesses at a time where so much of that is happening, and when we, everything is occurring in relationship to something else, and in this realm, and when we decontextualize, it's easy to dehumanize. And when we start to expand context and we say, of course you want to do this back, it's only a thought away to say, oh, maybe that's how they got there. And there's
Yes,
this, right? And so there's this cycle. And
definitely.
then like, from the various platforms that we're at, we're in different places, and how to be an orientation to that bigger picture of love and healing for our planet. There is some element of privilege, I would imagine, that comes with not being in, and I don't use privilege, by the way, in a negative sense. I know a lot of times that's kind of in the last few years, like, that's from your privilege. Well, yeah. I hope, my hope is that we all get those privileges. Like, that's what we are moving towards, is that sense of less. It is from our safety. It is from our equality. It is from our inclusion. It's from that space that we actually have different jobs to do at the same time. And so, from the seat of maybe sitting in this culture, maybe our work looks like depropagandizing ourselves, to de-tribalizing our thinking, to see that it's easy to say, I believe we're all one, and then except for you over there, right? What exists beyond the identities that we've cultivated, where we extend our humanity to each other? This is what I was saying earlier when I said, where is it difficult? It's difficult in the place where it stops, right? Where we otherize. And so when we see that, and I want to be careful with my words, but like, in those whether we've entrusted or by force, are operating as the voices of the collective, those that are in positions of power and decision making, when those voices are generating the narratives of separation, it ends up inflicting tremendous harm upon so many people. So when we look at the relationship beyond, like, what we are from the unmanifest pure consciousness to what's playing out within the manifest experience in the material world, and we want to bring our practice from what we know to be true to where it's difficult for us to be in relationship with that truth, it implores those that are, quote unquote, lingering in the ethers, to actually sort of jump off the sidelines and start to participate in the material world. Because when we are waking up to the truth of who we are, we're actually becoming more powerful. And when those people that are waking up but ascending and sort of turning away from the world, that leaves a vacuum that is filled by the power hungry rather than the truly powerful.
Mm-hmm.
So we want to hear your voice. We want to feel your energy. We want your participation, your collaboration, your creations to show up in the world. So often we've been wounded. That wounding leads to that path of internalization, introspection, that becomes the ascension. But we sometimes we still carry those wounds. I don't want to be seen. I don't want to be heard. I don't want to be around the conflict. I don't want to bring up that point. It's all those places where we're sort of shifting out of being seen and avoiding and hiding. Those are the spaces where we need the voices of those, and the energy and the creations and the contributions of those of us that have been on this inward journey, to start making their inner work outer work. And that's a big part of the coaching process that I like to do with people too, is meeting them not only in the how do I bring the outside in, but how do I bring the inside out?
Oh my gosh. I don't even have anything for that. That was beautiful.
Thank you. I think that is what is needed. I think that's the medicine for our planet. I think there's been a lot of us, billions of us, that have been in this awakening current. And, from wherever you are, one of the I love to write poetry, and one of the poems I wrote ended with this verse. It says, "Is there any greater freedom found than the voice of a soul who has touched the depth of silence, but is here to make a sound?"
Will you say that one more time, Scott?
Is there any greater freedom found than a voice who has touched the depth of silence, but is here to make a sound?
That's beautiful.
That's the integration. That's when we think about the great beings that have illuminated the human experience through time immemorial. It's those that really delved into the depth of being, and then that ground of presence actually reverberates out to the whole. And because that is our shared, not common denominator, but common numerator, it's like our highest common through line, it will resonate as authentic and give a certain virality or contagion of positivity, of energy, of inspiration, of creativity, of courage, to start to create a world around us that is a reflection of the authentic world within us.
Yes, yes, yes. So much. Yes. If my listeners got nothing else but that piece right there, I pray that they really take that in, because I know for me, I am deeply, and I needed to hear that right now, Scott, with everything happening. And so, yeah, so I thank you. I honor the fact of, it's important, guys. And I really pray that this episode touches you the way that it's touched me. It's important to model and to also realize, that there's really for me, this is why I love having people like you, Scott, on my show, is because I get to continue my learning experience. I see you as a teacher, in the same way that others see me as a teacher. It's really, we're all just teachers for each other. And that's what we're doing here. And so I thank you so much. I honor you deeply for what you're doing in the world and what you've just done for me, because that little nugget there at the end, I don't know if there was something that came through you. It felt like there was something that came through you to speak that out. And so I want you to know that that's been well received, at least from me. And I'm sure it'll be well received from numerous of my listeners as well. Before we go, just to bring it right back to the podcast here, from a very spiritual moment, please tell us about your book. I think this is very important. I'd like everyone to go check out Scott's book and his website. So Scott, please tell my listeners both where they can find you, and then tell us a little bit about your book.
Sure. And thank you for what you just shared as well. So my website, where you can find me if you'd like, is embodiedinsightcoaching.com. And a lot of what I write these days, I'll post up on Instagram. So that's just Scott.Feinberg, Feinberg. I'm sure it'll be in your notes. And in terms of my book, yes, it's called Reverse Graffiti, The Sacred Art of Unbecoming. And for those of us that are listening right now that aren't familiar with the term reverse graffiti, you've probably come across it before. It's an art form wherein artists will take anything from rags to pressure washers to walls in the city that have accumulated layers of dirt on them, and they'll remove portions of the dirt to create a juxtaposition between the state of the wall that has accumulated its conditioning in the form of dirt, and that which lies beneath it as its fundamental nature. And it's the juxtaposition itself that actually creates and is the prerequisite for the artistry. And I just found that to be really beautiful. That to me, it encapsulates so much of what we spoke about today. That there's an experience of like, have you ever seen a dirty wall? Yes, we think that, but really, have you, or have you seen dirt on a wall? So that sort of one layer of human experience is we identify something with its presentation, with its conditioning. So I might encounter another individual. If I see them as their conditioning, that tells me that I'm in mine.
Ooh.
Right? Now, if I experience them as their deeper nature, as the wall beneath the dirt, that
Yes.
tells me that I'm in mine, that I'm in my truth, right? As their deeper nature. Now I can experience you as your true nature, but in your conditioning. But I'm not conflating as and in. In fact, it's the behavior of all of our conditioning that actually generates the beauty of so much of the human experience, which is why we don't want to invalidate it as we do our work, because we start to go, wow, if it wasn't for that that heartbreak, if it wasn't for that anxiety, if it wasn't for that fear, if it wasn't for that anger, I would be missing so much of the holiness of life incarnate. And what it's what allows one to be compassionate with the journey of another, and to meet people in those most profound spaces. And so I am blown away by the idea that adversity can become artistry. And
Yeah.
I, and so that's really it to me. That's what reverse graffiti is. And so it's really a collection of poems, of prayers, of passages of Dharma, and life stories that speak to different points of this beautiful, messy journey that we're making our way through. And sometimes we can feel alone in that journeying. I know a lot of these writings, they weren't put down on paper with the intent of writing a book. A lot of them, when I think about it, I visualize being in a heavy state of sometimes depression, or sometimes a light state of inspiration. But typically I imagine myself like sitting on the floor or rolling over in my bed and grabbing my phone and like typing something for myself. And then after a while, there was a collection there, and I put a note in my phone that said, "Don't die with these writings on your phone." And the fear of being seen was outweighed by the fear of my voice not being expressed. I think it's a powerful practice to imagine that moment of our physical death, and thinking what will have mattered. And
Yes.
when I think about that moment, it makes a lot of things that I was making matter not, and it gives rise to an energy that says, I don't want to look back and realize I kept it all inside. And so this book is a lot of the inside making its way out, in hopes that we can meet each other in our shared humanness.
Oh my gosh, so much love for you, and just everything that you are and doing and being here with me today too. I really, really thank you a lot, Scott. And please, so all of this information is going to be in the show notes, including the link to buy his book, his website, and Scott on social media. If you don't follow him, please do so. I do, and it brings me tremendous peace and insight every time you post something, especially when it resonates with what's already happening within me. So it's good to be connected with you in this space. Feels like a kinship of sorts. And I love what you said too about adversity becoming artistry, because I really believe that to be true. I think all of the happenings, all of the like you said, the heartbreaks and the challenges, the loneliness, it's all part of the human experience, and we can fully live that, and we can be okay with that, and it's all just temporary anyway. Scott, I thank you so much. I know you have other obligations to get to, so I'll wrap it up by saying, please go follow him on social, guys. I'll link all of his information in the show notes. Until next time, we'll of course talk to you guys very soon. If you have any questions or this triggered any thought processes or other further questions, please email me as always, or message me on Instagram like you guys always do. I appreciate you so much for listening. And also, please, guys, share this episode. If it brought you value in any way, rate the show. Our goal here is just to reach as many people as possible, bring an alternate perspective of light, so we can continue what Scott and I just talked about here today, and bringing that inner out. So we love you, Scott. Thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you for having me. Thank you for the work that you're doing and bringing to the world. I appreciate it. And it was truly an honor to be here and share this time together. Thank you.
Thank you so much for listening to this episode of Ignite the Spark Within. If this podcast brought you value, or you think it would bring someone else value, please hit that share button. My mission is to reach and help as many people as I possibly can. And you just never know who could use that one good piece of information. And hey, if you have any topics, discussion questions, or ideas for future episodes, you can reach me directly at sarah@sparkflc.com and just write podcast in the subject line. And if you haven't already, please rate the podcast on your favorite podcast channel. This helps bring awareness to the show. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications so you're alerted for all future episodes. Please go ahead and follow me on Facebook and Instagram. And if you're interested in pursuing coaching for yourself, you can visit sparkflc.com for more information.